I hope you will give me the time of day. I went through a shocking divorce. I couldn't work, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. I had to go to the doctor multiple times because I didn't know how to exist anymore, and he eventually diagnosed me with major depressive disorder, MDD. He prescribed me medication and therapy, and he also recommended that I apply for disability living allowance because I simply wasn't able to work anymore. It added up to an okay amount of money every week. I'm not trying to say that I was clever for doing this, but I always thought if somebody gets it, everybody should get it, or nobody should get it. And this is just a thing that many people did around the area where I was from. This was before they started changing the UK benefit system. This was before all the austerity nonsense that started coming in. But when I was on it, that meant I was on it, and I had it easier than people who might need to apply after they started changing everything. I think it's universal credit now or something like that people get, but I was happy with the amount of money I was getting every week, and it was more than enough to live on, although it didn't give a fantastic life. To all you taxpayers out there who feel a sense of anger, don't blame me. Blame the system. It was there, I really needed it, and I told myself I'd use it to get by, so that's what I was going to do, no questions about it. It wasn't always like this though. Before I was married, reasonably successful, but ever since she left me, I was struggling to cope with the day-to-day, and also I didn't like the idea of giving money to my ex-wife for my 3 kids. She left me, therefore she should have to suffer the consequences. In what world should a woman be able to leave a man, take his kids away without him having any say in it, and he has to pay for it? That shouldn't even be possible. If you want to leave me, you're the one who has to suffer financially, not me. And she was one of those vindictive, evil women who left me, took my kids away, and got into a relationship with the guy who had a damn sight more money than I did, and I'll be damned if I was going to struggle for her. That was not happening. So that was what led me down this path, and depression and all that. I wasn't fit to work. I mean, I was not fit to work in the slightest, even if I wanted to, because I did want to. I missed my old life when I was successful and had a good life. I think it's important to say that life was so hard back then, and I had a friend of mine who was a bit older than me, and he was married to a Thai. This was probably back in the early 2000s, and he could see I was really depressed about what was going on in my life, and he told me to get myself to Thailand. I took him up on his advice, flew into the country, and everything he said about it was most definitely true. One of the things I remember that sort of twigged with me was when I was in a bar on Sukhumvit Soi 8. This guy was from Newcastle, and he started talking to me in a broad accent as you'd expect, and the way he said, "I'm here and my dad is signing on for me while I'm here," that made me think, you hideous person, how dare you? He had this beautiful Thai girl with him, who didn't have the luxury of a fantastic government benefit system, so she had to put up with being with him, whereas this guy was getting his dad to sign on the dole for him while he was in Thailand. That was everything I needed to know, that if somebody like this, as far as I was concerned, the exact sort of person who shouldn't be getting government assistance, because it's people like this who would have been the ones who did all the basic menial jobs in the country in the past, which now meant that people like me had to go to Thailand to take advantage of a system that doesn't hand out money for free. But when I saw that was what made me think, you know what? I'm so depressed and struggling to come to terms with my current existence without medication, I will no longer feel any sense of guilt by getting what I'm entitled to. It still wasn't my intention to actually use those benefits to live in Thailand at the time though. I just wanted to be okay with myself. I hadn't got that far yet. And any younger people listening who are from the UK dealing with the benefit system today, I don't envy you. It's a lot more difficult, a lot more strict, and they still give it to the people they shouldn't give it to. I was English, going back for multiple generations, So I was always of the mind that if people who are barely English can get it, then I should get it too. The thing was, I really needed it, otherwise I wouldn't be able to exist. But that first time in Thailand taught me all I needed to know about the world, I think. I lived a very guarded life in England, both growing up and in my adult life until my wife decided to divorce me and put me in this hideous mental position. It's very difficult to explain when you're going through such mental anguish, when you're so depressed that you can't actually function in the right way anymore. It's very difficult to explain this, and many people will say you should just pull yourself together and get over it. If only it was as easy as that. Thailand made me feel better in myself. Thailand was a cure to the problem that I had. Thailand fixed me in a way that I didn't think was possible, and it wasn't only the fact that life was better there than it was at home. There were many things that I loved about it. In a way, this is why the whole thing that happened to me is even more cruel than it needed to be. When I was in England, I physically couldn't work. I had trouble eating, I had trouble sleeping, I was losing weight, I was a nervous wreck, and I couldn't function. When I was in Thailand, while I still had these dreadful problems, they weren't anywhere near as bad. They were still bad, but I could function just about properly and get along with my life, so it didn't really make sense to me why I wasn't able to take advantage of that to make myself better. I need to talk about when I went to Pattaya for the first time. I think I felt in Pattaya like my grandfather used to feel when he was my age. However, he could do it in his own country and I couldn't. I needed this feeling that I could just be who I was and still have things slightly easier than other people could. That might come across wrong, and I'm not intending it to, but in Pattaya, I felt like I could be the person I always thought I was. The bars became places that I loved. I loved the bars in Bangkok as well, everything about it I loved. But in Pattaya, I felt a special connection to the place that I hadn't felt anywhere else before. I loved to be able to just go out and spend a small amount of money that I wouldn't miss. I loved to be able to go out and have a few drinks, chat with the girls, and this wasn't breaking the bank. I didn't have to have the constant pressure whether I was doing was acceptable or not. I wasn't searching for approval from anybody. I wasn't always looking around and thinking if anybody was looking at me all the time, making me feel uncomfortable. Thailand made me better, mentally, and because of that, I suppose physically as well. And Pattaya, especially, was a place that I felt better and than any medication the doctor could give me in England could. I also went to a small island not far away from Pattaya, only for a few days with a girl that I met, and it was just exactly what life was meant to be. I was starting to be okay, I was happy, and while I still struggled severely with depression, it wasn't to the extreme that I felt back in England. It was so cruel. The realization that not only did Thailand improve my condition, but that the only thing that could improve my condition would be me taking the money that I was getting in England and living in Thailand on it, that shouldn't have been the case. And people should have been able to use the money anywhere they needed to make themselves better, if that was what they needed to do. But what I think, I suppose, has no bearing on how things are actually done, even in the slightest. I was very depressed though. I wasn't really in a fit position to work, but when I got back from Thailand after that trip, it really made me understand that what I had in England was there for my advantage, and if I'm eligible for something, I might as well take it. I'm not trying to come across as someone who thinks he's really clever, I'm not. I was just there to use the system because the system was available, and the thought of somebody else getting it and me not, that was enough for me to think I'm going to get everything I can. Time is still going on, and there were limits on time spent outside of the country every single year, which was the cruelest problem, because Thailand helped me to be okay. I kept returning to Thailand whenever I could manage it, sometimes for stretches that sort of blended together, but long enough that I almost felt settled there before I had to return home, by worry and illness, and the fear that I was pushing things a little bit too far. I still had no plans to live there, but back then the exchange rate was so favourable it felt amazing. It felt so good to finally be getting the financial help I needed, even though I was still struggling mentally to cope with life, and to be able to use that money to do absolutely crazy things in Thailand because the people there didn't have the same opportunities. England used to be really good. What happened, I don't know. Now they keep spending money for people who aren't even English, but it is what it is. It was heartbreaking watching the devaluation of the pound though, because I was getting into a great routine spending time in Thailand regularly. But by then, 2009, 2010, we just weren't getting as many baht for our pounds. But still, you could have a good time there on this money that I was getting, which was good enough for me. A few things happened that made me think that it would be possible for me to actually live in Thailand on this money, although that was technically not the right thing to do. As far as I was concerned, the system was wrong, not me, and I wasn't someone who would just blindly follow along because those Eton educated politicians decided who can and who cannot be helped. What was the difference? I needed it, I was eligible for it, and why can't I spend it abroad? But the first thing that happened was my friend who introduced me to Thailand sadly died. I didn't have him to sit in the pub with anymore and talk and actually support me. And also I met a girl in one of the bars in Pattaya in 2010, and I thought it would be better if I actually lived with her as opposed to just seeing her occasionally. I also toyed with the idea of taking her back to England, but I didn't go down that route, though it was my plan to go and move to Thailand as quickly as I could. I would also like to point out that I wasn't from a bad family. I wasn't a commoner, for a lack of a better term, and that was one of the reasons why I also thought that I was more than entitled to the money I was getting, even though I had a few qualms about it. It pains me today. I still watch videos about Thailand all the time. There's one channel that I watch, this guy from England. He's everything that I left England to get away from. The way he sounds, the way he looks, the way he is, everything about him. He's the epitome of everything wrong with England. Yet the guy is in Thailand. In what world is that acceptable? That someone like that should be in Thailand? I don't know. But he's there, and I suppose that's what it is. Him being in Thailand is okay, but the fact that he flaunts himself all over YouTube, as common as muck, as my grandfather would say. But I get more people would probably judge me than him, so who am I to talk? So it was in 2010 that I somehow managed to convince my elderly uncle to go in and check on my post all the time at the house I was getting. Full disclosure, that house did belong to my mother, and she had no idea that I was claiming benefits on it because I wasn't able to work. Because I got the money and I paid it straight to her. But my uncle agreed to go and check my post for me. He was one of the old sorts of proper English people. He didn't know what I was doing. He just thought he was helping out. He didn't know what the post was or anything like that. He just agreed to keep an eye on my post for me and let me know when official letters arrived. He was the sort that would drive around in a battered up old Audi, a couple of £1 million in the bank, a massive house, but he was exactly like a wealthy person should be. You had no idea he was wealthy. And he was the sort who turned his nose up at all these nouveau riche people, as he liked to call them, who liked to flaunt their wealth. He even made a remark about the time he went on an around-the-world trip and Thailand was a place he went, and his sheer disdain seeing some of the offensively over-rich Thai people driving around in luxury, while there were literally people sleeping en masse on the street. He hated that show of wealth. But because he agreed to help me with this, I was set to be able to make my Thailand dream a reality. You would think that when you're leaving the country, England I'm talking about, every system would be perfectly joined up. I honestly didn't know how it all worked. I remember flying direct to Thailand after I got myself a non-immigrant visa, and once I was settled, my weekly budget in Thailand was about 20,000 baht. That covered rent, food, going out, and day-to-day costs. I still needed to pay bills on the house I was living in, so that's why I needed my post, and I landed in Thailand and went straight down to Pattaya, where I had met my girlfriend. I think I might as well be truthful. I watch basically every single one of the stories on your channel, and I do take a lot of pleasure in reading the comments. The way guys always try to say why they met a girl in a bar, why they wanted to get into a relationship with girls that work in bars, and my reason for wanting to do this, get into a relationship with a girl like that, was quite simple, really. I didn't like the fact that she worked in a bar per se, but what I did like was the fact that I felt like it was a 100% in my benefit relationship. I used to listen to lots of stories that my grandfather would tell me about how he met my grandmother, and something like that wasn't available to people like me anymore. Although I had a wife before in the UK, 3 kids, she was just as bad as the girls that worked in the bars. Multiple boyfriends before me, no self-respect. I did love her, but the fact that she was doing that out of enjoyment and because she wanted to do that for no other reason than the fact that she wanted to do that. I thought that was far worse than the girls in the bars who perhaps didn't want to do it to the extent that she did. My ex-wife was considerably worse in that regard than any of the girls that worked in bars, orders of magnitude worse. She was a disgusting piece of work, so I wanted to get into a relationship with a girl that worked in a bar because I thought that relationship was balanced correctly. That's what I'm trying to say. I was from England, I was from a good family. Perhaps I was the black sheep of the family who had severe depression that got worse throughout my life, but that meant something to me, and I thought that I would get the respect I deserved. I was 42 years old, mind you, when I moved to Thailand, and my girlfriend was 25. I didn't think that was too bad in terms of an age difference. Not that I have anything against the guys in their 70s with girls in their 20s. All they're doing is enjoying themselves, so what's the harm in that? It was great to be in Thailand full time. I'm feeling better with myself, although I still have severe depression, but I relied on the benefit payments to cover life while I was there. I found a place to rent in Pattaya. My girlfriend and I were living together and life was good. She had a kid as well, who lived in a small rented house in Pattaya with her mother and aunt. Her mother also worked in the bars, and I don't know whether I should say this as a bit of a laugh, but when I found out about this, I hadn't met her mother yet, and she showed me pictures of her mother. So I went to the bar where her mother worked, but let's just leave it at that. When I was getting serious with my girlfriend, and I'd met her mother looked at me with a very shocked expression on her face, as you can imagine. When I introduced myself as the boyfriend of her daughter, she thought it was a coincidence. Week to week, I spent roughly 20,000 baht in Thailand on everything, from the 8,000 baht rent to daily costs and going out, and the level of spending made life feel manageable for a while, yet I really struggled to understand how some guys ended up giving their girls so much money, especially at this point all those years ago. I've heard of people giving up to 20,000 baht a month, and that's insane if you actually think about it. That was way too much money and they didn't need that at all. My girlfriend was happy with 8,000. Although I was losing my hair, I was still in reasonable shape physically. I just struggled so much with the mental side of things. Aside from those outgoings and the utilities that I had to pay on the place I was living in, I was just living life to the fullest every single day. We'd go out to the bars, we'd go out to restaurants, and on top of that, we might go away very occasionally. The thing about Pattaya though was you don't need to go anywhere because it has absolutely everything you could possibly need. And all throughout 2010, I was really happy with my life. I stopped checking as religiously as I used to do in terms of the money I got because I never had any problems with it. At the start of 2011, I got married to my girlfriend. We just did it on paper, so I was going to be able to get the marriage visa and extension. I didn't have much liquid cash available ever since I got divorced, and I called up my uncle and asked if he could send me 10 grand so I could put the money in the bank for my visa. And he sent it to me, so I had the 400,000 baht in the bank and a bit left over. Once it had been there for a while, at this point I was doing border runs for tourist visas. I actually went with my now wife to Laos for our first overseas trip. I'd never been to any of the neighbouring countries before, and I felt like Laos was quite different to Thailand, although quite similar at the same time. They drove on the wrong side of the road there, whereas in Thailand they drove on the proper side of the road, and they didn't have any of those big malls, no bars like they had in Thailand. It wasn't as fun or open to the possibility of having a great party lifestyle, but it was very laid back and peaceful, and I could understand why some people who are getting on in years might actually like to live there. The place we went to was just opposite the Thai town of Mukdahan. It was called Savannakhet. They had a Thai consulate there where they would give you, actually, a 1-year multiple entry non-immigrant visa based on marriage without having to show any financial proof. I only wanted to get the single entry because it was my intention to extend it in Thailand, so I didn't need to leave the country again. I did actually have plans to explore the neighbouring countries when I was able to mentally, though I wanted to do it with my wife. However, I didn't want to do that because I had to leave the country. I wanted to do it as and when I wanted to, not because the Thai government decided that they didn't want me to stay in the country properly, if that makes any sense. We actually had a nice time in Laos. It was actually quite unexpected really because I didn't know what to expect, obviously, but one thing I liked was one little place we found that served really good French food. I'm going to put my hand up and say the worst thing about Thailand was the food. I mean, you could get Western food everywhere, and I ate Western food all the time because I'm from the West. Thai food was like the worst of the world's cuisines. I mean, Laotian food, and as I would later learn, Cambodian food and Vietnamese food, it was all pretty dreadful as far as I was concerned. When I went to Malaysia, though, I actually really liked the food there. A lot more palatable to someone from the West because of the Indian influence, so that was one thing. But after staying in Savannakhet for around a week, instead of only one night, which we planned to do, we returned to Thailand, and when I was eligible to, I managed to extend my visa based on marriage, and now I didn't need to leave the country again. Over the next year of living together, we stayed in the same place in Pattaya, and it was during that year that we travelled to different countries around the region, and I'm starting to actually feel a lot better. It was just a way, though, to see more of the world. But my favourite place always remained Thailand. Thailand just had that special thing about it that you couldn't quite put your finger on. And when 2012 came around, I was due to go back to England to go and see my doctor because I was still struggling so much with my depression. It was awful having to fly back to England. England used to be such an amazing place. In my grandfather's generation anyway. Perhaps my mother and father's generation as well. You know, people who were in their 40s in the 1960s. You know, when you get off the plane at the airport and it says, "Welcome to the UK border." It's not the damn border, it's the middle of the country. That really annoyed me. And then you go and get stamped into the country before they had those gate things. But anyway, I made it to my house, and from there I made an appointment to see the doctor in a few days' time. It was awful being back in the country though. Thailand really is a better place than England. If you can afford to live there, that is. I would argue that England is better if you've got nothing, because you can get something, although it's harder today than it was. But if you've got something, Thailand will always be the best place, there's no denying it. The thing I liked most about England, though, was the ability to just go to the local chippy and have a really good fish and chips, go to the local pub and have a really great home-cooked style meal. That was one thing that I missed the most. And although they had quite a few English-style pubs or restaurants in Pattaya, it was as if they were run by people who were doing it because they lacked a better idea, like they had no passion for food, and it was always bad quality. But there are some really nice pubs in England. I mean, fewer than there were, so I took advantage of that fact that I could eat some really nice food while I waited for my appointment. When the time came, I went to see the doctor. I didn't really know what to expect, but he talked with me for a long time and said it could be another 3 years before I had to see him again. The amount of stress and pressure it was causing me to have to actually go and see the doctor was so dreadful that the doctor thought it would be advisable for me to go, not for a long time after. That's the thing I want to be clear about. I felt like I had demons in my head, and any form of pressure and stress could send me into huge depressions that would last for weeks. It would take me weeks to get out of them. After seeing the doctor, now I was free to return to Thailand. But as is often quite typical, I ran into my ex-wife, the hideous old bag. She'd put on about 10 stones. She always used to complain about being fat. We'd go out as a family, me and her and our kids, and my parents as well as my siblings and their kids. And my wife was the one gorging herself on egg and chips, wondering why she was so fat. Maybe stop shoveling all that into your mouth then. But I don't think she quite put 2 and 2 together. But because I ran into her, she was screaming and shouting about me not paying money that I owed or anything like that. What was I doing for work? And I just told her that I was actually living in a different part of the country, and I was just there visiting family. I wasn't working at the moment because I wasn't fit to work, which was 100% true. She got really angry, as you would expect, and I managed to extricate myself from the situation, but it was my guess that she probably followed me. I'm not actually sure. I returned to Thailand, back to Pattaya, and I promised my wife that we would go away together somewhere in Thailand, but we would take her mother and her kid and her aunt as well. I'd been in England for probably 8 days, which was 8 days too many, and I wanted to go to the beach somewhere, just to get the awful thoughts of England out of my head, which sent me into really crazy depressions. When I was in England, I went to see my uncle and he asked me how I was doing in Thailand. I told him everything was good, and he was just in the process of fixing his car for the millionth time because he refused to replace it, and he asked me what kind of car I was driving in Thailand. I just told him I didn't have a car, and he just looked at me and said, "You need one." And I said, I don't need one, but it might make life easier. So he just went inside his house, came back out and gave me $5,000. Buy yourself a car, lad, we're not peasants. I thanked him, and I was able to use that money to purchase a second-hand Toyota Vios when I got back to Thailand, and we used that to drive from Pattaya down to Koh Chang. We stayed in a reasonably nice hotel. I paid for her mother and aunt and kid as well, and I didn't have any problem with that. And her mother was always trying to laugh and joke with me when nobody else was around, because she didn't know at the time anything about when I actually met her, which I suppose I should say that I did. Of course I did. She just thought it was a shocking coincidence and not actually my warped mind. We stayed there for just under 2 weeks, and this was after being back in Pattaya for about a month. And I woke up one morning and it was time for me to go and check my payments. I logged into the bank and the money wasn't there. I panicked a bit because I relied on this money to live, but it wasn't there. And that was the first time that it happened to me. I nearly had a heart attack because that was my only source of income. The absolute worst of it was that I couldn't call them until they opened in the UK, because I was checking this very early on in the morning in Thailand. I had an agonising 6 or 7 hour wait before the hotline opened, and I could call them to ask what was going on. Eventually, I was able to call them and I spoke to them saying, where was my payment? It hasn't arrived. Where is it? And they just said, we sent you some post to do with your situation. We need to return it before we can reinstate it. I asked for a bit more information about it, but they couldn't give anything. They just said, return the post and your case will be reviewed. I asked if there was anything I could do to get an emergency payment or anything, but they said no. From there, I immediately called my uncle, asking about the post. He already sent it, he said, a week ago. So it was most likely waiting for me back at our place in Pattaya. So after that, I went straight back to the hotel, told my wife and everyone that there was an emergency. We needed to go back to Pattaya immediately. That was one of the most stressful car journeys I've ever had to do. Together with my depression, it was awful. They're wanting to stop off along the way to eat, to look at the sights, and I just said, no, we need to get back to Pattaya. There's some post there, and I really need to deal with it as soon as possible, because it's important. So I didn't even stop when they desperately needed to use the bathroom. I was so focused on getting back there as quickly as possible. I told everyone I wasn't able to drop them off at their place. I needed to go straight to look at my post. So they had to make their own way back to their place, and the first thing I did was go to the area where the post was delivered in my condo building, and luckily it was there. I rushed up to the room and ripped it open. There were quite a few letters, but the one I was wanting stood out and I opened it and started to read. We need to talk to you about your claim. Please respond by, and it was a date, something like 14 days from the date of the letter. We were already 8 days into this. It went on to say that they had some information that may affect my claim. It didn't say what, and that was it. All I had to do was prepare some documentation. The only thing I could think of, though, that someone had said something. That's why it made me think that my vindictive ex had decided to follow me back to my place and somehow have a rummage around. I was absolutely terrified. I was not well, I was depressed and I was stressed, and this just added to it, and I started to feel like I felt in England. They went on to say that I needed to provide documentation by post, so at least I didn't have to go there. They wanted to look at a few things, so I could get everything they needed. I mean, most of it, so I just hoped everything would be okay. I had a huge depressive attack, which is why I was on this money in the first place, and I knew that I could provide most of these things, but I didn't know how to handle it. It was my understanding that they might receive a lot of tips about lots of people because people didn't like everyone getting this money. I just hoped it was one of those things to get the documents, sign off on it, and everything would be good. That's what I was hoping for. What I decided to do was call them back because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't think it was a serious complaint that they had, it was just following protocol or whatever. So I got my license, found a bill that my uncle had sent me that was recent, and also printed out some bank statements. I think that was all they needed, and I had everything ready, and I sent it to my uncle, and asked him to post it on, hoping that he wouldn't know what it was about. And he was so naive that he didn't. About 3 weeks later, I got another letter that my uncle sent saying everything was good. Thank you for providing the information, and we're sorry for the inconvenience. With that out of the way, I could finally relax again. And as far as I was concerned, that was taking up my energy, that was taking up my effort, and it was causing me to be more ill. And it was taking up my worry. So I had no qualms about taking the money because I felt like I needed it. And I did because I couldn't live without it. But in order to apologise to my wife, mother and family, I would take them away again. I agreed to take them in a few months' time, because they understood I had problems in England. But of course I didn't tell them what it was about. Life from there goes very well. I'd say another whole year goes by and I'm still getting the money and there are no problems. And then I received the very unfortunate news that my mother had sadly died. I wasn't very close with my father. He always viewed me as the black sheep of the family. He was the type of person who would say, "I have forgotten more than you know." Never had to work a day in his life though, yet he didn't think it was appropriate to share his wealth with his kids. Of course, I would have shared my wealth with my kids, and I was speaking to my kids from time to time, but I just couldn't deal with my ex. And it was always my intention to make it up to my kids once they left home, and I think they understood. At least my eldest son understood. He despised his mother, and I think he took after me in that sense because he was very good at getting as much out of her as he could. Because she was with this other guy who had a load of money, and he was just very good at it. He was always on my side. I haven't even mentioned that yet, because I do really love my kids, and my eldest, he was always great. The thought of me giving money to his mother after she left me, he hated that. My two younger kids, I suppose, didn't have as strong feelings, but they understood what I was doing because they didn't need the money. They were having great lives, so they didn't need anything from me, and they hated their mother for wanting to take things from me because she left me. But anyway, I had to return to the UK quickly because of my mother. I was living in my mother's house. This was a house that had been left to her by her parents, and it was because of that I had it. If it was down to my father, I wouldn't have had any house at all. So I returned to the UK, and then there's the question of what I'm going to do with regards to the house. Can I live there anymore? Luckily, my father let me stay there as long as I continued to pay the rent. It was awful attending my mother's funeral. I loved my mother so much, but she was one of those sorts of people who had no idea what struggles there were in the world because she was brought up with, I wouldn't even say a silver spoon in her mouth. I would more likely say a golden spoon in her mouth. But having to say goodbye to her was dreadful. My ex-wife showed up at the funeral as well, brought the kids, and that was the first time I'd seen them for a long time, and immediately they came to me and said how much they hated my ex's new husband. They were growing up, so it wasn't too long before they'd be able to leave and do their own things. I spent a few weeks there, arranged a direct debit for the house with my father so that he would get his rent even though he didn't need it. He was probably on a pension of $6,000 a month, as well as all the money he got from his investments and things. He didn't need the money, but he was just like that, and you can't change how people are. I was very happy to return to Thailand. I haven't spoken much about my wife yet. I think everything's good between us as far as I'm aware. I'm supporting her, she seems to be okay with that, but I wouldn't say I was in love with her in the traditional sense anyway. Back in Thailand, I'm still coming to terms with the loss of my mother, and my depression is getting worse and worse, and my wife is now getting to the stage where she seems to want more from me. I never got that, because she was getting older, therefore she should want less. But I don't know. I guess I got that one all wrong. But I'm just spending quite a bit of time by myself, going out, just thinking about my mother and my childhood and everything like that. I'd already decided that it was my ex who had given those problems for me before, and I hoped she wouldn't do it again. But I wouldn't put it past her, because I was pretty sure that if she knew, she would do it. The problem was, though, everyone at the funeral was talking about how is Thailand for you, and now she knew for sure that I was living there. I was in a right state mentally at this time as well, and I was even struggling to hold conversations with people. Back in Thailand, I'm living life again, and I actually got a little bit of money from my mother, much to the disdain of my father. Just so happened to come from her side of the family that was separate, and me and my two siblings each received about 50 grand. I wasn't going to get it yet, though. We had to wait for things to happen. And in the meantime, as I said, my wife is wanting more things. She's wanting our own place, she's wanting more money. And I didn't really want to give her any more money because I didn't feel like she's actually done anything for it. Says me, who was getting money for not being very well. But I had done something for it because I was English, and that was all that mattered. She wasn't working, she was living a life of leisure, and I suppose 8,000 baht a month wasn't a lot, but she didn't have any bills to pay for, and if she had a few days not doing anything, she could go out with her friends and have a reasonable time, so it was enough money. I suppose I was also giving 5,000 for her kid, but I took it for what it was. This wasn't a traditional relationship in that sense, it was a relationship of convenience, and I was happy with that, and that was what it was all about at the end of the day, just being happy. As time goes by, I'm probably talking about another 6 months here. I'm still getting along with my wife, but she starts talking about wanting a house. She starts talking about different business ideas that keep coming up, and I told her that this is something I'm not willing to entertain. We went to visit one of her friends who worked in the same bar that she worked in when we met, and this girl got married to the really rich guy from Switzerland. He was absolutely loaded, and we were invited to the housewarming party of this mansion that he bought in Pattaya. Should I say she was invited and she wanted me to go along too, probably to show me this house so that her request for something a lot smaller would seem reasonable in comparison. I felt bad for that guy. He was 78, his wife was 23, and he probably put about 40 million baht into this house. He had 3 or 4 really nice expensive cars parked outside, and his wife had gold all over her. Picture your typical bar girl, but then picture her being so full of herself, so proud of herself that she'd managed to sink her teeth into this Swiss guy, that she was talking to me like we were equals. I never quite understand that, but my wife always talked to me in a very respectful way, just like you'd expect. But this girl was talking to me as if she was somehow the answer to the world's problems, and it really didn't rub very well with me. This guy was paying for this party in the house. There were so many girls there from the bar, and he was there feeling like he was the cleverest guy in the world. I found out about 3 months later that the relationship he had completely broke down because she got drunk and, basically cheated on him with this Thai guy in the house that he paid for. But fair play to him, he did pursue her through the courts and got at least half his money back. I started to get very jaded about the situation with my wife, though. I wanted a wife that would have been happy with nothing more than being looked after. I wanted a wife that saw where she came from, and anything better than that was a win. That's all I expected in my life in Thailand. I didn't expect anything more, and I didn't expect anything less. But after she'd seen what her friend was able to do, she's looking at me like I'm not really the sort of man she thinks I am. After 6 months, we got divorced. She'd been cheating on me, and I found that out, and that was one thing I wasn't going to accept. And I still don't understand it, because it's not like what her friend had managed to do was achievable by every single girl that worked in a bar. She kind of won the lottery, that girl, and she should have accepted that and been very grateful about the situation, but she wasn't. And in a way, I was quite happy to see the back of my wife, because how she changed so considerably since we met, it was shocking to see. I didn't learn my lesson, though. The day of our divorce, I didn't give her any money because I didn't have any money, apart from my income coming in. My 50 grand still hadn't arrived yet because of the insane UK legal system and how long things take. But that very same day we got divorced, I was back out at the bars, and I wanted to show my wife that I could find someone better than her. I was in my mid-40s, and I met this really beautiful girl. She was actually 32, and I thought that would make all the difference. And when I met her, I felt so different from when I met my first wife, or second wife, because this wasn't meant to be a relationship of convenience with her. She wasn't younger than me by too much, and therefore everything that went along with it was different. This is something that I'm thinking about anyway. I really liked her. I probably would have liked anyone that I met that day, But things got serious with us pretty quickly too. I managed to keep hold of my marriage extension just by not going to immigration. It was still in the passport, and I just hoped I wouldn't have any problems with it, because technically I was meant to leave the country and get a different visa. But I think it was the visa restrictions that meant I only spent 3 months with this other girl, and then I got married to her. It just so happened to coincide with the time that my money had arrived. I had it sent straight to Thailand, the 50,000, which was the easiest thing for me. The solicitor handled everything. I still saw my old wife around, my ex-wife, because she went back to work in the bar on the lookout for someone with more money, and I went with my new wife to her bar on a few occasions, and I was talking to my new wife about buying a condo soon, just to do anything I could to make my ex feel bad because she had no business being anything other than happy with the situation that I'd given to her. This is my opinion, and I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me. But after getting that money, a month later I'd already bought a condo. 1.3 million, a small 1-bedroom, and this was in Jomtien. And of course I bought it in my own name. I actually felt in love with my new wife, probably more than I'd been in love with anybody before, and I'm starting to change considerably after I was with her. From the little things like always wanting to make sure that she had what she needed, always wanting to make sure she was happy, giving her more allowance than my old wife, and I think it was the fact that she had never had any kids that made me more attracted to her. That was a huge thing for me, because how I experienced my last relationship in Thailand, her kid always came first, which I understood, I'm not that stupid, but everything was her kid this, her kid that, and that's not really my problem in the slightest. But my new wife had no kids, and I was actually starting to think that I needed to pull myself out of this situation I was in, maybe go back to work, maybe go back to the UK, see if the doctor thought I was fit to work. Maybe start my business again that I had in the UK before my first ex decided to ruin my life and put me in the position I was in. I was thinking about getting a visa for my wife to go to England, keep the condo in Pattaya, travel there twice a year, and then, though, when I was checking for my next payment, probably around 6 months after we were married, it hadn't arrived, and I quickly called to see if there was any post on the way. There was. It was sent a week ago. So it was just a waiting game before I could get it to see what had happened now. It was no way to live. I was starting to get very bored of it. I mean really bored of it, because there was always that constant worry that something could go wrong, and if it did, my life would basically be over. Luckily, I had just over 1 million baht after buying that condo. I still had that, and I wasn't spending money apart from my income. So if something went wrong, I should be good for at least a year before I needed to do something else. But of course, I wouldn't have wanted the money to go all the way down to zero. The next few days were torture while I was waiting for the post to arrive, and when it did, I ripped it open and it was worse than I expected. Whereas before they were just requiring more information from me, at the top of this document it said, and I can't remember the exact words, something to do with fraud service, some kind of investigation, something like that, and I was required to go for an interview to discuss some matters. That was one of those moments where you think, oh dear, what am I going to do now? The depression, that kicks back in, and the ideas to work again are not there anymore. It was clear that they knew something about something, and again, I was in a situation where I had no idea what I was going to do to get out of it. I knew I had to call the helpline, but I didn't think they could do anything quickly. But then you did hear in the news from time to time about people getting extradited back to the UK for so-called fraud. But still, I didn't believe that this was the case. But what I wanted to believe and what the law were completely two different things, and completely irrelevant, and no use me even talking about. It was a very difficult situation to be in, because there was a chance I could go back to the UK, attend this interview and everything would be good, and I'd get my money reinstated. Then I could return to Thailand. But there was also the chance that I could go back to the UK. They have a lot of evidence against me that I'd been living out of the country for a number of years, claiming it. A lot of money by this point, and then I would be in a world of hurt. I should also mention that the letter that they sent me had indicated dates, and the dates they were talking about were the dates I wasn't in the country. And it was a long time, we're talking about a number of years. I didn't feel safe in Thailand anymore. It just happened at the worst time too, because I was starting to really feel happy with my new wife. I felt like this was the first time I was actually in love with someone. I'd just bought a place to live in, and now all I could think about was going somewhere else altogether. I think they knew the country was Thailand though. And of course, Thailand does send people back to the UK all the time. There are cases in the news like this, and I was thinking this could be me, and I didn't want that to happen. So I just spent a few days really thinking long and hard about what the best course of action was. This was probably 13 years ago now. I hadn't really been to many other countries apart from Thailand and a few around the region, and countries in Europe was out of the question. Or perhaps I should call them up and offer to pay the money back. I was starting to think that that might be the best thing for me to do. If I called them up, agreed to pay the money back, then maybe they would let it go. Perhaps I could tell my uncle that my business had failed in Thailand and I needed some money. He'd surely help me if I needed the help, because he thought I was doing business. I should also point out that my uncle has died by now. So after thinking about it long and hard for 3 days, I called my uncle, told him what had happened, my business had completely failed, and I was out of pocket to the tune of about 100 grand. I told him I wouldn't be able to stay in Thailand anymore. I still wanted to leave Thailand just in case, even if I got everything sorted out, just to err on the side of caution. And my uncle, bless him, said that he'd happily help me out, and 5 days later he sent me 100 grand. He was my favourite person in the world, and I was hoping that I would come to some kind of agreement over the phone as opposed to having to go for a meeting. So I called them back up, explained a number of things, and to cut a long story short, now I was willing to pay the money back. They had no interest into taking things further. And because of that, I paid the money back and they accepted it. With that closed, I was now good to go, but I didn't want to be in Thailand anymore because I just felt like I was always looking over my shoulder. My wife, I told her that I'd lost my income, lost my source of income, and I didn't have any more money coming in, hoping that she would feel sorry for me and say that she would stay with me through thick and thin. But as soon as I couldn't give her any money, literally the same day when she was due to get her allowance and I couldn't give her any, I could have done, but it wouldn't have been wise, she just said that I was a bad man and she wanted nothing more to do with me. So in a way, that taught me everything I needed to know. She was okay to take money from me, even when I had none to give. It also told me that I didn't want to be in Thailand anymore, so I moved to a different country. I'm not prepared to tell you which country I'm living in or what continent the country is in either, and since that time has passed, I had the unfortunate news that my father passed away, and I got a third of his money, so I'm living an amazing life, and my depression is under control. I do accept that there is a lot of luck involved. I do accept that what I did perhaps wasn't the right thing to do, but I was just so jaded about things. I wanted to live, and I wasn't able to work. I was prepared to work, but I wasn't able to. I haven't remarried since. I've had girlfriends from time to time, but the moment any talks of money comes up, so you can probably guess it's in a country that's a lot poorer to the country I'm from, but the moment anyone wants anything out of me, more than a token amount, that's the moment that I end the relationship. I've been single ever since. Every relationship has turned out exactly the same way, and if only I had known everything I know now before I even got married to my first wife all those years ago, my life would have been so much better. It would have been so much better. And I suppose if I want anyone to take anything from this, it's number 1, don't be like me. Number 2, don't get into a relationship if it's going to cost you your money. And number 3, look after yourself first.